back. Was out in Albany, New York last week for the CrossFit Games. Helped out a little bit out there. Mostly spent time kind of catching up with people I haven't seen in a while. Just the Smile and Wave committee. But really enjoyed that. It was a good event. And overall, I thought it went really well. Little travel back here, back to coaching class, hit the 5:30, 6:30 a.m., worked out at 7:30, so back into the nice little routine, which I love, and have a ton of stuff to catch up on. And this podcast, I had a lot of different ways I wanted to go about it, but I had this run recently of, maybe we'll talk about, we'll talk about the CrossFit Games and upcoming Friday fitness files, but I've had this run lately of like really great Uber drivers. And I used to travel a ton, almost every weekend for a couple of years. And that pretty much like came to a screeching halt and never really got back to it at that pace. And so it's been funny. I recently just been traveling a lot over the last couple of months. And I was talking to somebody today I work with, and I was saying how like, I don't know if this is a sign that I'm getting like old and crotchety, but I was like, I felt like when I traveled every weekend, we never got delayed. It happened like once in a while, but I feel like it never happened. And I don't know if that's just like chalking that up to like a terrible memory, just what I want to remember, or maybe that was the case, or maybe just I was, so into the flow and consistency of travel at that time, I didn't really notice the delays. They were just like a part of what I was doing. And now I feel like the last couple of flights I've been on, just like massive delays. So I feel like back when I used to travel all the time, we never had delays. But now there's so much traffic in the sky. I mean, there is. But anyway, so where was I going? Oh, yeah. Traveling again. And and like a lot of really good Uber drivers. And I kind of had very different conversations with each of them. One young lady... So I had landed back in Boston after being out on the West Coast, visiting CrossFit the Ranch and doing some work out there, and then flew back really late, landed at like midnight, get the Uber, had like over an hour and a half ride ahead of me, and the airport was slamming, and I was flying into Boston at the time. Airport was slamming as it usually is. And, get the Uber, get in the Uber. And it's sort of like this really long ride to where we were headed. It's late, kind of. And I like to chat in the Uber because I think it's weird to just totally, it's not weird, but I don't know. I don't like to totally fall asleep. Just thought it might be helpful to like help stay awake because late at night. But the Uber driver, she was kind of talking to somebody on her phone. But then when they kind of got off the call, just kind of asking basic questions. Hey, did you just start? Last shift? Blah, blah, blah. How long you been doing this? Do anything before this? And, sometimes I try and gauge on like where they're at. And she was really talkative and nice. And we were just chatting, and it was like a really long ride. And she got to a part, she goes, this ride's really boring. And we were laughing about that. And just talking about different Uber rides she's had late at night. And so, of course, it's getting late. Like, we're creeping in on, like, probably 1:30 a.m., maybe 2 by the time she was getting close to dropping me off. And so I was like, so what do you do after this? If this is, like, your last drive. And then she had to go back north and then even further, which I always feel like a total shitbag when that's the case. But I guess kind of that's what, I don't know. They kind of know what they're in for. I don't know. But anyway, so we're, like, chatting about stuff. And I was like, all right, so what are you going to do when you head back home? And she's like, well, I'll pretty much sleep for a little bit, but then I got to start getting everything ready for my kids to go to daycare and school, and not school, daycare. And then I'll nap for a little while, and then I'll go Uber. And I was like, it's like that all the time, huh? Because she was talking about how she typically drives later at night. And she's like, yeah. And I was like, wow, that seems like a lot. She's like, I just love it, though. She's like, I love being a mom. Kept talking about how, she had multiple kids, told a story about how she had her recently lost her infant. Her infant died, and really sad story. But then she had another child recently. And I think they ended up having the same birthday, like the same day and month, which is wild. But, it's just, I'm thinking about this and I'm like, okay, it's super late at night. I'm tired. She's tired. She's going to turn around, drive a pretty long time, probably at least 90 minutes back in the other direction. Maybe lay her head down on the pillow for a little bit, get up, start cranking about her day, getting her kids ready for daycare. And she just kept talking about how excited she is to be a parent and how she just can't believe people don't want to have kids. And, and didn't really seem to miss a beat. And I'm sure, I'm going to talk about this in the other cases too. Like, I'm sure everybody has a bad day, where she just doesn't want to have it. But it was like, there was real happiness in her voice. And like, she smiled and she laughed. And, and I was just thinking about like, especially in like CrossFit and maybe some of the endurance endeavors I've done, or just like the fitness culture I'm involved in there. Everyone's always talking about being so tough, doing the hard thing, running X miles or, carrying this thing or lifting this weight. And I'm like, what's tough? Tough is doing an Uber drive. Even if you choose it, tough is doing an Uber drive that late at night, turning around, barely getting any sleep, waking up and getting your kids ready for daycare, and then to go back out and do it over again. Like I think that's tough and happily, like there wasn't like a, I think she was, surprised at how non-exciting the drive was, and that every once in a while she has these really long drives, like that happens, but she's like excited to get home and, set her kids up so they can go to daycare. And, was telling different stories about her kids and what they like to do. And, she has some kids at different ages. I think she had three kids, all boys. And it was just amazing to me. It was just like a reminder of like, here I am begrudgingly like, man, it's late. I'm going to get in late. I got to get up early for work, blah, blah, blah. I'll have to go home, walk the dogs. And she's like, she still has to, she drops me off and like, I'm in comfy land, I'm at home. And she has to like turn around and drive the other way and is excited to go do that so she can be with her kids. And it was just like one of those good reminders of like, being tough, I think has so many different definitions and explanations. And there's so many different ways to quantify it. But yeah, I don't know. I thought it was amazing. Okay. And just really appreciate it. Like it kind of it really made the end of my travel wonderful. Her attitude and just approach on things and the fact she wanted to chat. I was really grateful for that. And it just made my roll into the next day awesome. Like I was just excited to do stuff, even though, I've not gotten a lot of sleep before and it turned out okay. And then I was taking another trip recently and get in the car. The guy showed up early and, sometimes I'd feel bad if I'm making him wait, but I ran out and said, hey, you're 10 minutes early. I said, I have a couple of things to finish up. Is that all right? And he was really accommodating, said yes. And so fast forward, this was the trip getting ready to go out to the CrossFit Games in Albany. And so I go out there, get in the car. I see that he has like, he's like, he has oxygen. And so, I hear that the oxygen machine, and he looks kind of like a younger guy, maybe my age. Not somebody I would expect to be on oxygen. So we get driving and we kind of start chatting a little bit, and I'm just asking him like, hey, what'd you do? Do you do this full time? That's typically one of the questions I lead with the Uber crew, kind of just gauge how much do they want to talk. Maybe we do like little boomer weather chat, that kind of stuff. And he starts talking about how before this he was a brewer and he brewed and bottled various beverages, beer, things like that, worked for a beverage company. Super interesting. And, from the get-go, he had like this really kick-ass level of self-awareness. And so I asked him what he did, particularly when he was brewing. He said, I started off as a brewer, but then I worked my way up as a manager. And he just stopped and he goes, he goes, I wasn't really good. Didn't really enjoy managing and moved out of that. And he said, I also had some health issues going on, and we'll get to that. And we had some health issues going on, so I moved out of that. And he stopped and he kind of goes, I don't want this to sound like, I don't want this to sound like arrogant or like I'm looking down on it. But he's like, I was really good at my job. He's like, I just really didn't enjoy managing people. And I was like, no, I said to him, no, I think that's a really awesome level of self-awareness. There's a really great podcast I think Freakonomics did. And this is for you guys. I didn't share this with him, but Freakonomics did. And I think it's called Why Are There So Many Bad Bosses or something like that. I'll throw it in the show notes. But anyway, what it talks about is like you basically, getting promoted to the level of your incompetence. And in it, they kind of shake out like, hey, there are some people who are just like really good independent creators. They're just really good at their job. It's like a data analyst or maybe a master brewer or something like that, engineer. And they might be really excellent at their job. And you look at them and you're like, yeah, let's promote this guy. Let's have him manage people. And whether or not they're capable of managing people, they might not want to do it at all. Even if they have like the skills for the specific tasks that they'll be managing. And I kind of said to him, I was like, man, I think that's a really cool level of self-awareness for you to be able to say that. And and then I knew the conversation was going to get really good. So from there I said, all right, kind of talking to him about the fact that he moved out of this job as a brewmaster. And now he's doing Uber almost full time. And he was talking about his health, and essentially he has a disease, an autoimmune disorder, and it slowly attacks and deteriorates his lungs. That's why he's on oxygen. He had been diagnosed, I think at this point, I want to say 18 years ago. 18 years, and he'd been sober since then, has a daughter, remarried, really cool life story. But essentially the way this disease works is at some point it's going to kill him, unless he gets a lung transplant. And there's methods to like mitigate it and slow down how the disorder affects the health of the lungs. And at the kind of this stage of where he's at, he's developed COPD, which is chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And essentially his airways just continually become more constricted, and his the difficulty to breathe only increases as time is going to go on for him. And he can do a lot of things, like he can manage lifestyle factors and things like that. But for the most part, even with the mitigation, he was saying this is likely something where slowly the quality of his life is going to go down and down over time, unless he gets a lung transplant. And from what he had learned and was sharing with me about lung transplants, and he talked, very openly about, and I paused and I was like, hey man, we don't have to talk about this if you don't want to. And he was happy to. And I was really interested, in his story and his outlook on things. And we'll get to that too. But he basically said to me like, hey, I can get a lung transplant, but typically with a lung transplant, there's like a lot of risk mitigation you have to do. And you got to change a lot of lifestyle factors to like make sure the body doesn't reject the organs, and make sure you can also stay healthy and you can't like overtax yourself. So he was just saying there's like huge changes to the quality of his life and the medications he has to take, and dealing with insurance and the medical system to get the medications. Like that was something he kept talking about too. So he's kind of been on the fence about this lung transplant. And anyway, so we kind of keep talking about this, and I finally say to him, and I said, hey man, I'm sure you have your good days and your bad days. But I was like, you seem like a pretty level-headed guy. I mean, you're optimistic, you're happy, you are interested to share and talk and engage about this. And because he was like, one of the things he and I did eventually talk about was this concept, you can't become your diagnosis. And he said a lot of people, in my similar situation, become so obsessed with their diagnosis, they don't see anything other than that. And it was really awesome to hear him say this, because, I don't feel like I've had anything that similarly threatening or stressful to deal with in my life. And I've had a lot smaller things that I felt like stressed me out more than he sure seemed, or like I couldn't get out of them or couldn't deal with them. But to hear him sort of have this very just positive outlook, level head, it was really moving for me. And he was just talking about it so openly. And so I did eventually ask him, I said like, hey, look, you seem pretty level headed and happy. I said, is that something you grew up with? Like, where does that thought process come from? And he basically said, I wrote down a couple of things and it was funny because we were in the car. All right, let me get to this. But I wrote down a couple of things, and he said, he really summed up as a couple things. One of the big things that stood out to me, though, he said two things. He said, one, I realized that the things that are important to me in my life are going well. His relationship with his daughter, his relationship with his new wife. He likes his Uber driving. And he's like, though my wife kind of has to push me around everywhere in a wheelchair when we're out in public, he's like, I have a great set of friends who I love hanging out with, different hobbies and things that he enjoys. And, while he has this thing that significantly impacts the quality of his life and significantly impacts how he has to live his life had he not had this, he was just focused on it so little, and not in a careless or an apathetic way. It was just really, he was just focused on the things that he found important in his life, most important. He focused on them way more. And the other thing he said, this thing is a small part of me. He said, I have so much more in my life. And this is when he went on to say that, he can't become his diagnosis. And he sees that in other people who are in a similar condition to him. The fear mindset that we were talking about is, the fear mindset is scary because there's nothing you can do with this one thing. And it really robs you of your ability to even look at what you can control in the other things in your life. And that was kind of summarizing what he was sharing. But man, I thought it was amazing. It was such a moving conversation, and I loved every second of it. And it was even cool because he was really comfortable to even talk out loud, and he was kind of sharing some of his insights, to how he felt about the lung transplant. And he said, one thing I really want to do is I do want to teach my daughter how to ski, and he's pretty limited to do that now. And he's like, I may come back around, and if that gives me the chance to do that with her, and the lung transplant gives me the chance to do that, maybe it is something I do. But, until then, he's like, there is so much good going on in my life. And I just thought that was so amazing to hear him walk through that process. And I also thought it was amazing, and this is advice, and I've talked about this a lot before, that I got from, Brian Chantosh. He always said, point at the light. And I love this advice because there are times in your life where maybe one thing's going bad, but you have 50 things that are going really good. And it's easier to point at that light. And there are times in your life where you have 50 things going bad and only one freaking thing is going good. And if you haven't developed that habit, that just response, that hopefulness, that desire to look for that one good thing, that one thing to point, that is light to point at and to pay attention to, it is harder to do. And he just seemed like he'd been practicing it, or maybe just, I don't know, was born with it. But either way, I was just so moved by that conversation. And I had one more that I wanted to talk about really quickly. And it was a fellow. Anyway, and I looked at that guy, and because I wanted to bring this back to us, the toughness, I looked at that guy and I was like, man, that's tough. This guy's a tough person. In the past, the more I think about this out loud talking to you, it's like toughness is this ability for mental flexibility. And I don't quite have a definition of that. But, there's this like keep moving forward even in adversity, but it's like doing it in a way. Travis Mannion Foundation, calls this struggling well. Clearly he's facing some physical struggles that other people don't have, but God damn, is he doing it well. And then the final ride I had, and this was when I landed in Albany to head to the hotel before the games we kicked off, is just got an Uber, was chatting with a guy, and local fellow. He actually had taught at a college that a relative of mine had taught at, and the college eventually closed down, and there was actually a really crazy I guess so, crazy set of events that led to the college closing down. But he was a educational psychology teacher, and so I was kind of I've never really heard about that and talked about that. And really what it was is like, just different learning theories and methods and ways to teach and, how to convey information and that kind of stuff. And so I was kind of trying to like prod him a little bit to see like, what'd you like about your job? And you can see that if you're a non-talkative Uber driver, I'm pretty annoying. But what did you like about your job and that kind of stuff? And what did you learn from it? Did you take any big lessons from it? And he kind of, it was really funny. He kind of paused and he goes, well, you just learn the foundational things. And I was like, okay, he's kind of beating around the bush. And so I go, yeah, but like, what's something that you apply in your life that you learned from your time as a professor? And he goes, well, most of what I applied in my life comes from program. And he was talking about, he's 36 years sober. 36 years sober. That's a lot of one day at a time. For those familiar. And I said that to him, and he goes, "Oh, you're familiar with the lingo." But it was really interesting to hear him, share that. That's a big accomplishment. That's an immense accomplishment for those going through that journey and seeking sobriety and working through that. And again, I couldn't help, and he was very open to talk about it. Just wonderful to chat to. And we talked about the area of Albany and, where I grew up somewhat near there. And, I think about that, 36 years sober, like he's got some toughness, he's got a lot of toughness. I say some as like a joke that's not meant to be disparaging, but damn, he has a lot of toughness. That's a lot of one day at a time to make that choice to, choose sobriety, over whatever whatever the substance of choice was. And, commit to that process. And all three of these, were really wonderful, unique conversations, but what they reminded me of is just like the broad spectrum, of toughness. And, my tough that I might think I am tough isn't always. And the other big thing I took away from it was just, God damn, there's so much to learn from people. If you can just spend a little bit of time listening to them. I took so much away from each of those conversations, aside from the toughness, just more practice in seeking the positive, the patience to just do the next right thing, even if it's one day at a time. Also learned that if it all goes to hell, I don't think I'd mind being an Uber driver. I even spent some time talking to him about like, hey, as an Uber driver, how do you tell if somebody wants to chat or not? Because I like to talk. That's why I would want to do that. But there's just a lot of hopefulness across those three Uber drives. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway is that that hope is there when you take a chance to look for it. So I was really grateful for that this week. And, maybe there's some lessons you can peel out of that 22 minutes of blah, blah, blah. But I absolutely loved it. So more tomorrow. Appreciate y'all and back at it. And we'll catch up on the CrossFit Games this week.